glad to see all of you today, and I was thrilled when Dr. Maha asked me if I would present on what's the latest on the ABLE Act, which I know that many of you have heard of, many of you may have lobbied for, and I'm here to tell you that it has passed the national government, the federal government. It was signed into law by President Obama, and it is now been passed by the state of Alabama legislature, and we're working out the details on the regulations. How this came about, it's been a long process, and I've been involved in it for over 8 years. What happens is we've got folks that are able to save for education with 529 plans, interest-free, use that money that saves up. We're all familiar with the ability to save income tax-free for retirement, 401k, IRAs, KIOs, SEP plans. Well, individuals with disabilities that need to qualify for government benefits that are means tested, and that's the majority of them, have a resource limit of $2,000. That's not anything, and that's the same limit that has been in place since Lyndon Johnson was president and the Medicaid program went into effect under the Social Security Act. So enough is enough. The disability community and advocates said we need a plan too, where individuals with disabilities or family members or friends for them can save in an income tax-free account that will allow this person to have something in addition to the limit of the $2,000 resource that they're allowed to have. So we were just thrilled when this bill finally got signed into law December 19th of 2014. And it adds Section 529A to the Internal Revenue Code. It's modeled after Section 529 education plans, but there are a number of differences that you'll see. We're not quite ready yet to implement it, but Dr. Gary Edwards, who's here in the office, and I were with Governor Bentley as he signed the legislation into effect, and I know for certain that our state treasurer's office is working very hard to get regulations and things in place so that we can have financial institutions open these accounts sometime next year. It'll take that long because regulations are being worked out between the IRS, the Social Security Administration, and the various states. That's quite a challenge for those three administrative agencies, but they're working on it, and we're staying involved in the process as well. Why do we have the ABLE Act? And first of all, I may not have mentioned that ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. The disability advocates that started this process, it was about 11 years ago when it first started, we're looking for a less complicated planning tool than a special needs trust. Now, I do a lot of special needs trust in my practice, and I don't think that the ABLE Act eliminates the need for a family to have a special needs trust for a child with a disability. The ABLE Act is a good complement to it. It's a good tool to have in your quiver of arrows to take care of certain situations. But it doesn't replace the need for it, and we'll discover that as I go through some of the requirements of the Act. We have a desire, the disability advocacy groups had a desire to lower the cost and presumably reduce the need for extended attorney involvement. I'm all for that, and this Act will help a good bit in that regard. As I said, it doesn't replace the need for a special needs trust, but it certainly will save a lot of money and expense when we have a little problem that comes up that's going to put a qualified beneficiary for SSI or Medicaid over that $2,000 resource limit. We have the ABLE Act that is going to sail right into the rescue, so that's a great thing. And an ABLE Act account is something that the beneficiary with the disability can control himself or herself. That's not the case with many of the plans that we have to acquire assets and not have them count. A special needs trust, right now the regulations say that it has to be opened by a different person and the beneficiary cannot be the trustee of the account. That's not the case with the ABLE Act. Anyone can open it and can also be the person that designates how funds are spent in the account. Now let's look at who is eligible. Unfortunately, it is not open for everyone in the disability community. But for many of you that are here and your children, I think it will be available for you. First of all, it's for a person that is entitled to benefits based on blindness or disability under Title II or Section 16 of the Social Security Act. Well, that's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. What does that mean? It means that if you were to go to Social Security or even to Medicaid and say, I have a disability, and they look to determine if you do, then you would be entitled to benefits based on those provisions. Now, it still doesn't tell you a lot more. Having a disability for Social Security or Medicaid purposes means the inability to work and earn, working earnings, not anything else, $1,100 a month for this year. That number is adjusted every year. I believe it's actually $1,090, but I usually simplify it and roll it up to $1,100. So if the medical reports indicate that right now you have a condition that's going to last at least a year and would likely prohibit work experience to allow you to generate gross income that much, then you have a disability. It's not unusual at all for a child that's 18 or younger not to have had occasion to work, and if they were looked at an adult age, which is what Social Security does, with the condition that they're in, would it translate to disability? Autism is one of those that's a maybe. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I have had clients that have applied for SSI for children with autism, and it was denied. But upon a hearing, which we get one fairly quickly in Alabama, it was approved. So, as Charles Tyler Clark says on his TV commercials, and I don't do what he does a good job at what he does, people give up too soon. Don't give up too soon for your child. Again, this is a $2,000 resource limited program. Now, the disability to also be able for an ABLE Act account, this disability has to have occurred before the individual reached age 26. People are thinking, 26, doesn't that have something to do with the Affordable Care Act and health insurance? That's probably where they came up with the age 26. But there is no direct relationship there. It's just that someone that's had an injury or a disability since birth, there's not going to be any question about it. If it's something that came on later in life, such as dementia or a mental illness that struck when someone was in their 30s, they're not going to be eligible for one of these accounts. And we have to have certification when the account is open. Now, this is one of the things that the federal government and the state government is talking about. How are we going to solve this? But it's not going to be difficult. If a person's on SSI or Medicaid, they already have that determination. Otherwise, we get a physician certification that says this child has this particular disability and should be considered disabled under the Social Security Act. So I don't think that will be much of a hardship at all. Now, what does the ABLE account do? It's an investment account, and the balance doesn't count as a resource towards that $2,000 limit. This is the same thing with a properly drafted special needs trust. Some of the particulars, individuals are limited to one account. So we can't have mom open one, dad open one, grandparents open one account. And very importantly, the amount that goes into the account every month cannot exceed $14,000. So family members have to coordinate. If it does exceed $14,000, then the account is not exempt. It fails. Okay, and the withdrawals have to be made for qualified disability expenses. What is that? It's going to be very broad. So I don't think we'll have a trouble coming up with what qualified disability expenses are. I don't see that as an obstacle. Now, contributions have to be cash. This is not something that we can put stock into or a piece of land or something like that. It has to be hard, cold cash. U.S. savings bonds, I find that to be a particularly troublesome area when people at 18 go to apply for SSI and they find out they have all these savings bonds. Maybe they didn't even know they had them, that grandparents had been buying them for years and putting their social security number on them. We can't just put those savings bonds in an ABLE Act account. They have to be cashed in and then the cash goes in. One good thing, if there are two family members that have disabilities and something happens to the first one, we can roll over the ABLE Act account to the account of the other family member. And that's a very broad definition as to what is a family member. The qualified disability expense is important. And as long as the fund is used for one of those items, then it is income tax free. To the extent, however, that it is not used for a qualified disability related expense, it is subject to income tax. So that's not unlike the 529 or the IRA. Okay, now here's a list briefly of what some of the qualified expenses are. I think you'll see that it's just about everything that you could imagine. I don't see entertainment or vacations on there, which are allowable with a special needs trust. So I'll just mention that. Okay, very important. The limit, the balance for an ABLE Act account is $100,000. If the account is more than that, SSI limits are exceeded and SSI will be discontinued. This does not affect Medicaid eligibility, however. In Alabama, people that get SSI automatically get Medicaid. It's going to be interesting to see how the state works it out when the individual loses SSI because of an ABLE Act account over $100,000, but yet doesn't lose Medicaid. We'll see how that goes. But at any rate, it is very important to know that for Medicaid purposes, the allowable amount is $350,000, which is the same allowable amount under a 529 account. Okay, you can only open an ABLE account in the state where the beneficiary resides. If you live in Alabama, we're going to have an Alabama ABLE Act account program next year, and you have to open the account here. What happens if you move to Tennessee later? We don't know. Those are in the regulations to be worked out. I would be surprised if it wasn't allowable to roll it over to the plan in Tennessee. If a state doesn't have an ABLE Act account plan, then you are allowed, if you live in that state, you're allowed to open one from another state if the two states agree that they're going to reciprocate on that. Okay, here is a big thing that disability advocates were very surprised about, and where there's a very real difference between an ABLE Act account and a special needs trust. There is a payback in the ABLE Act account, regardless of who puts the money in. In a special needs trust, parents normally put in money at their death from their estate or from life insurance or various plans that people have to send money to the trust to be managed for a child with a disability for the remainder of his or her lifetime. Now, there is no payback to Medicaid required in that circumstance. The child lives, there's money left in the account at the end of his life. It goes to siblings or wherever the parents want it to go. However, with an ABLE Act account, Medicaid has a lien against everything that's in there, regardless of whether it's the child's money he or she put in or it is the money of parents or grandparents or third parties, as we call them in the legal world. So that's important to note. You don't want to let this thing get really big, especially if the client is having residential services or programs that are being paid for through Medicaid eligibility. So another important thing to know is that the ability to direct investment decisions. You can make a decision on that twice a year, and that may be something you're familiar with from your company 401k plan or IRA. But the state will direct the investments, and you have the ability to pick which one that you want to do twice a year. If somebody, remember the maximum amount is $14,000 a year that can go in, well, that happens to coincide with the federal gift tax exclusion. And this account can receive those gifts from families. Remember, limited to $14,000 per year, and you can only have one account, but that's a good thing. Okay, another, I'm going to skip this. Let's get down to the bottom line here, since my time is just about up. Where the ABLE Act would fit in for the majority of folks. Here's a perfect use for it. Someone gives your child money that is for gift, for graduation or for birthday or whatever it might be. You're subject to the $2,000 limit because your child is over 18 and they're on SSI, working out how much they're able to work and fit in the community, and we want this benefit to continue. This is the perfect solution for it. Open an ABLE Act account. The child can even open it himself and put the money in there. You have to report it, but it does not count against that $2,000 limit. Perfect use for it. Again, it allows a competent beneficiary to control the account. They can use it for whatever they need to that's a qualified disability expense. Let's say our beneficiary is working and they want to be encouraged to save. They want to save. Parents certainly want them to save. But if we save it, we run a risk of that $2,000 limit being a problem. ABLE Act account, perfect. If you need to transfer, a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account into an account that is not going to be counted as a resource before the person is 21. If it's less than $14,000, this is the perfect place for it to go. Otherwise, we'd have to do a private special needs trust that had a different kind of provision with a payback in it. This eliminates all of that expense and trouble. We can fix it like that for free. So I think that's great. People will use it to save for a home, for a car, wedding, happy occasions like that that will not interfere with that $2,000 resource limit. And we can also use, in Alabama, what's called a pool trust, the Alabama Family Trust. It is not without expense to set it up. It runs $1,500 to open an account. An ABLE account costs nothing to open, and you can administer it rather than having to go through a board. I love the Alabama Family Trust. It's a great tool, but I think this is important to look at first to see if it fits your situation. One last point, the families still need to have a plan in place for their child that includes a special needs trust. The reason? You want to perhaps leave life insurance or retirement benefits or part of your estate, and most likely those benefits are going to exceed $14,000. So we need a special needs trust to get the big money. We also need a special needs trust because we want it to go to our other family members at the child's death. And ABLE Act does not allow either of those things. So it's a great use, but we also want to be aware of its limits. Thank you so much. I have an article that I wrote for Birmingham Parent Magazine, and I'm going to leave some copies of it outside so you can pick one up if you're interested. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.